Welcome to Grognards of Gaming, and I am with you as always as one of your co-hosts. I am Rob, the Grognard Dog, and with me are my colleagues.
Miracle Mike.
And GMJB.
All right, gentlemen. So when we last left off on our last Grognards of Gaming episode, Jonathan, you had suggested that we talk about non-standard RPG settings. So I think that's an interesting topic. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And JB, as we always do at the beginning of our episode, why don't you maybe give an explanation to the audience of what exactly you mean by non-standard RPG settings? I mean, I think Mike and I knew what you meant right away, but go ahead and give us an explanation, if you please.
Well, it could be anything that's not either like a standard fantasy, maybe, or it could be something that's not like the standard sci-fi. I think it could be something that really kind of fits more into a smaller niche. I would think, or just a different way of thinking about the game, so that you come up with characters that are probably a lot more thought-provoking, maybe.
Okay.
I think that's probably a good rundown of what I meant.
Okay.
I think, yeah, I think that everyone's had that. Wouldn't it be cool if we did this? And really had a lot of times they come out of people sitting around and kind of brainstorming what they'd like to play, and sometimes you come up with these ideas that are not typical, trope sort of games. Some of them actually lend themselves to like fighting tropes, as far as that's concerned too. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, Mike, when Jonathan suggested this topic, is that what you were thinking, or did you have any other ideas? Did you conceive of it in any other way?
That is part of it, but I also took a thought about taking a different view on a classic genre. So, in other words, in a mild form, something we've already talked about. Instead of playing the hero, playing the villains.
Yep.
That's a little more unconventional, but within the same realm. But there are others that I've seen. Things like actually one of the most famous ones, pop culture right now, as an example. We talk sometimes about the Critical Role stuff. They had one where they played the familiars of all the characters instead of the characters themselves,
cool.
like the familiars and the pets. I've seen one published by Pathfinder where you play plants in a garden, things of that nature.
Hilarious.
But it's, those kinds of things. It's still like the fantasy genre, but it's a different twist. So either an unconventional, and we've done some unconventionals, or a twist on, the normal type of game that you play. That gives you a different view.
Well, I got to tell you that, you and I mean, I think all of us here, we cut our teeth on Dungeons and Dragons and AD&D and that sort of thing. And I remember the day you, Mike, said to us when you were living in Swedesboro, you were like, I bought this new game from this new publishing company called White Wolf, and it's called Vampire. And everybody plays a vampire. And I want you guys to come over. I've been reading the book. I'm really excited about it. I want to run a game of Vampire for you. And it was like Paul, who's one of our Grognards, Pat, and Steve, our early gaming buddies, and me. And we were like, we all like looked at each other. We were like, wait, what? Mike wants to write what? And I remember like Steve was the one who was the most skeptical. He's like, we're all gonna play vampires? Like, he's thinking Dungeons and Dragons vampires, the level draining type. Yes. And like Steve had the hardest time wrapping his mind around it. The rest of us were kind of like, all right, let's give this a try because we trusted you. And we came over your house and you ran it, and you just blew us away with it. It was just like it was a whole new take on gaming. It was the narrativist approach rather than the gamist or simulationist that Gygax had come up with, and it was like this whole Rice. What was her name? Anne
Anne
Rice.
Rice. Yeah.
Vampire
Yeah.
setting, and we were in. We were hooked. And the irony is that Steve went on to be like a bigger White Wolf GM than all of us combined. He did like LARPs, he did tabletop RPGs. He was like Changeling was his particular setting that he loved.
Yeah.
But we're back in the day. White Wolf's Vampire was the unconventional, and now it's quite conventional. I mean,
It's
after that,
mainstream.
yeah, it's mainstream. After that, like everybody started coming up with new settings for RPGs. So I know you guys as well have done like so many RPG settings, sci-fi, sword and sorcery, space fantasy. Mix the two, pulp, vampire horror, all this Cthulhu. We've done it all. So at one time, those would have been considered unconventional, but I think at this point they're very conventional. So that to me like presented a challenge. I was like, well, like what is unconventional by today's standards? I don't really know. So I gave it some thought, and I made a very, very short list. It only had 2 items on it. But then as we sat down to record, Mike, and I looked at your background, and I saw the looks like an elf woman, and she's got looks like a flower or maybe some sort of contraption in her hand. It's kind of steampunky, and that reminded me of of another one. So I added a third thing to my list that I played. And then as we've been talking, as you guys have been fleshing out the definition, I was like, all right, this might fit the definition. So I have a little bit of a list here. So I don't know how should we do this? Shall we take turns going around saying an item of our list? Are your lists not long enough? Are they very long? Like what? How would you like to do this?
I mean, I've got a handful,
I
a
don't
couple of
actually
them
have
I
a list.
mentioned.
I just
Yeah.
know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All
Sure.
right. So then, JB, since you suggested the topic, why don't you start? So what is the first non-conventional setting that you've either run or played in that you're eager to talk about?
There's actually several that are like what I'm about to say. That
Okay.
we had a friend named Hardy LaBelle
Yeah.
who um, suggested that we play a game in which everybody pick whatever genre they want
Oh
and
yeah.
come up with a character, and everybody gets pulled into the same world. Yeah, so it was like a an early version of like uh, alternate dimensions type of thing, where somehow we all get pulled into the same group, but we're not from the same worlds. Um, we had one guy who was like a Frankenstein's monster. Um, we had another character. The character that I played was basically a gunslinger. So it was very much like, and I don't even remember having read it or thinking that I was getting the idea from it, but I might have from Stephen King's The Gunslinger series. But
Oh.
I
Okay.
played a character named Mal, who was just this gunslinger who had a magical gun, a ghost gun, and it had powers that when he was chasing some. I'm sorry, no, he was his name wasn't Mal. His nemesis was Mal, and he
Oh.
was Casper Daub was the name of the
Oh,
character.
Casper Dog.
And
Okay.
so we were basically fighting the good fight together, but we're all from different kinds of stories. Um, and I love that idea. Now, just recently, one of the last big games that we played in was uh, a friend of ours um, had run a game that was the same thing, where we all decided we were going to be from different, like mostly different role playing campaign backgrounds, and we just picked what we wanted to be from. Somebody was from the I think we were playing in there's a game campaign world which is I can't even think of the name of the city, because we didn't go back there a lot. But there is a D&D setting, which is um, one main city that's a hub of a bunch of different worlds. And we ended up playing from uh, all these different campaign settings, and not all of them were even D&D, but there was somebody from Ravenloft. I think I might have been from the Eberron series. People were in from Greyhawk. So we were coming in from just stuff that was kind of D&D related or something fantasy related. And that was a lot of fun too. But I just always remember back to that one where Hardy said, just pick whatever kind of character you want to play and we'll put it in. And we ended up doing that. Now, that would have been the first one. And I don't know if you
Okay.
want me to go on from there.
Yeah, well,
Pick
so
one.
I have a few things to say about that before we, yeah, and we'll go around and then we'll come back to you. You could talk about another one. But that was just before I joined the Queens New York group. And I remember I joined when you were running the alternate universe pulp game. And that
Yeah.
was sort of my first game with you guys. And I remember everybody was still talking about that game that Hardy had run, if I'm not mistaken. And I know that
Hardy
like
LaValle.
Jason played a dragon. He came from like a dragon world, and he had played a dragon, and you played the gunslinger. Do you remember any of the other characters, like what Manny played, what Edgar played, what those other guys played? Peter.
Um,
I don't want to put you on the spot. I'm
I
just
think Manny was kind of a Frankenstein's monster.
he was the
He
Frankenstein's
was a
monster.
monster.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
and then uh, gosh, I can't think of
All
what
right. Well,
everybody
that's
else
okay.
played.
So it's an eclectic group of heroes. What was Hardy's? What was the story that Hardy was bringing all of these heroes from different universes together for?
I think there was
Was it?
something threatening all the worlds. Basically, the kind of I don't think we called it a multiverse, but there was something that was kind of threatening the multiverses that we were trying to come together to um, to fight. I think we had a ship. I drew a picture of it once, and I wish I had it here. But of this kind of mystical ship that we could use to cross the dimensions between the worlds.
Okay.
Um, uh, but
And
we were
and
trying
did
to fight some force that was trying to kind of like conquer everything.
okay. And did
And
Hardy have kind of like the little Dungeons and Dragons cartoon game master character who was the manipulator and brought you all from different worlds, or was it some sort of cosmic accident where you all ended up in the middle of the multiverses, or how did he bring you together? Because
I can't remember. I can't
yeah,
remember
I
how
can't
he brought
remember.
us together.
I mean, there's a
Yeah.
number of ways to do it. The reason I'm asking is because if any of these ideas sound interesting to our listeners, and they're like, "Oh, I might like to run a game like that," it would just be helpful to just tell them how we did it, some of these details, so that they can see what worked or what didn't work or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I
The second
suppose there's a. Go ahead.
the second game that I was talking about, that was like that, where somebody pulled us all together to help fight a big bad. There was an interesting one that we did that was actually set in Feng Shui, and I think you might
Yes,
have even played in this one.
I
And it
probably did.
was the idea to bring everybody together from different worlds, because that was the whole idea, is you could be from different time periods.
Yeah.
And the pull together was that we're all half brothers or sisters of the same father who had
Yes.
been to all different, you remember, and we all
I
had to come up with different characters and explain how this guy had sired us, which was
yeah,
really funny.
that
It
was
was a
funny.
great way of bringing everybody together. It was really
It
a lot of
was.
fun. And one
Yep.
of us was like a ghost too. So it was like, how do we
Right.
explain that?
Right.
It was
Yeah.
really interesting.
I think that was Sloan. I think he played the ghost. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
hilarious. That was hilarious. All right. Okay. So, Mike, how about you? What's your the first one you would like to talk about?
The earliest one that I can remember, and this was with a college group when I'd play sometimes with you guys and I play sometimes with the college group. We played a game called Toon. Now, if you've ever heard of Toon, where
Toon.
yes,
Remember
Yes.
that?
yes,
Yes.
where you essentially make like a Warner Brothers animated character,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole goal was to bust up everybody at the table and bust up the GM with your antics. So that was
Yeah.
that was kind of the first fringe type. It's not your standard hack and slash. It's not a dungeon crawl. It's not,
Right.
it's not. It wasn't goal oriented. It was complete chaos.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It was.
and so that was the first one. That was the first one that I ever ran. And I think at
Oh,
the
you
time,
ran it.
or no, I didn't run. I played. Somebody
Oh,
else ran. I played. I think I played a porcupine.
that's awesome. That's awesome.
Um,
And tell us about the porcupine. What was the character like?
it was just so it was kind of a, I guess it was, a take on the scaredy cat as the porcupine, throwing the spines, doing things like that, making a mess of things, popping things, popping water beds, putting holes in this, putting hole. It was just, all physical slapstick, all the bad things that could happen to a porcupine, how do porcupines hug, how do they, all that kind of stuff. And I think I pulled something from like one of the shorts I saw on television about like porcupines kissing, going, ow, 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 ow. And that just gave me the idea for the porcupine character.
That's hilarious. Now the game master, what did he bring to the table? I mean, like, was there a story, or what was was there a goal?
It's more of a setting. So
Okay.
think about any of like the cartoon shorts you have, like,
Hmm.
you're all pets, and it's a day in the house, and you got to keep the baby safe or something like that.
Got
It
it.
was
Yeah.
it was things that it was,
Yeah.
hijinks, whatever kind of hijinks. If you want to, if you ever seen an old movie called Baby's Day Out, where the baby is just out and like moving around a construction site and things are falling all over the
Oh
place and people
yes,
are trying to
I have
save them.
seen it.
Yeah. So that kind of hijinks. They were short sessions. It was in between, when we were like, we couldn't get everybody together for the big game. You
Yeah.
get this,
Yeah.
and everybody make a cartoon character, and you just sit and have an afternoon of just laughing until your stomach hurt. It was.
That is a fantastic way to fill a game night. If the game, if it falls through or people don't make it. I actually played that game, and I think it was Ed who ran it. Our friend Ed, who was a player in the flagship Dungeons and Dragons game that you happen to be running for us right now, Mike, online. He's an old time gaming buddy of ours, and Ed ran it, and I played Guillermo Ganat. And I got the idea from the Great Space Coaster, where there was Gary Gnu, and
Yeah.
he was a new, but he didn't know how to pronounce new, and he pronounced the G, and he called himself Gary Gnu. So I was like, I like that, Guillermo Ganat. And Guillermo was like this rap guy, like he was like very urban Nat, because there aren't really gnats in urban settings. So he didn't know he was a gnat, and he called himself Guillermo Ganat, and it was that kind of thing. So, but I have no recollection of like what story Ed might have put in front of us or whatever. And I'm not even 100% sure that we ever actually played the first session. I know I created Guillermo Ganat. We may have sat down and played a session, but I have no recollection of. Paul would remember. He would know. He has a memory. He's like a memory like an elephant. But yeah, that is an excellent filler game. And you're right. The goal is just to bust each other up and make everybody laugh, and not so much to gain XP or something like that.
Right.
So yeah, great one. All right, well, I remember. So the first one that I wanted to talk about, it wasn't one that we ever actually played, but it was one that Jonathan, you had proposed to the Queens group, and I can remember where we were when you proposed it. So we were leaving Jason's apartment in Astoria, and we were walking to Michelle's apartment in Long Island City. And we were walking along that big street that her apartment building was on. And as we're walking along, we were talking about Star Wars. Michelle was not into Star Wars. She didn't know anything about Star Wars. This was before the Wizards of the Coast had put out the D20 Star Wars game. And so the only Star Wars game in town was like West End Games D6 version. And we were like, and we were like, wouldn't that be cool to play Star Wars? We had talked about it before, and Michelle was like, I don't know Star Wars. I'm like, I've never seen it. I don't really know anything about it. And we were all like, well, all you'd really have to do is watch the first 3 films, and that would be it. Then you'd know all you need to know. And she was like, I don't know. So so this was like an ongoing conversation that we had been having. So we're walking along to the big street where Michelle's apartment is on this particular fateful night, and you said, "I got a great idea. What if we played Star Wars, but it's like prehistoric Star Wars? So it's not a long time ago at the time of the Battle of Yavin. It's a really long time ago. It's like before lightsabers were lightsabers, but when the Jedi still used like metal swords, and you were pitching some other things, and we were all like, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. And you're like, yeah, and you still got the Knights of the Sith, and you still got the Knights of the Jedi, but they don't use lightsabers, yada yada. And we were like, oh, that sounds really cool. And Michelle like kind of was like, all right, because it's like it's far enough from what you guys are used to that it kind of puts you and me on equal footing. Like, I don't know the setting, you guys do know the setting, but Jonathan's proposing this third, he's triangulating, we can all find common ground. And so she was like, okay, all right, that's fine. And but we never actually played it because shortly thereafter, like months maybe, less than a year probably, Wizards of the Coast came out with the D20 Star Wars, and we flipped our lids. We were so excited. And go ahead. You want to say something?
I remember when you guys got me that book for my birthday.
Yeah.
And we were all it was when because I seem to remember it was when Jason had moved to New Jersey.
That's correct.
Because I remember it happening there at his house there.
Yeah.
And we were all
the reason
around.
Yeah, well, before you say it, the reason we bought you that book, and I think it was for your birthday, the reason we bought you that book was because we were saying, like, what we should get Jonathan something. And I think somebody picked, like, what if we get Jonathan, like, the D20 Star Wars books? And we all kind of looked to Michelle, and she was like, yeah, let's do that. And we were like, yes! So we did that, and then go ahead, you tell the story from your perspective.
Oh, I remember when I opened it up, I was like, guys, oh my God, I could totally run this, and I was so excited. I was looking through it. And then this has nothing to do with role playing, but I just remember I was really, it was like, I was on that couch that he had. Like, it might have been a fold out couch. And I was kind of like drifting off because it was early and I was kind of drifting off. And I remember you guys going, oh, look, he fell asleep. And then I think Michelle may have said, sitting there like that, he looks just like Jabba the Hutt. I remember hearing it as I'm like drifting off, and I said something like "Dudas."
Yeah,
I wasn't really fully asleep, so I kind of remembered it. And you guys all laughed.
That's hilarious.
But I really, I loved that game, and that was such a cool, different game to play, right?
And that became our flagship campaign where we all round robined, even Michelle eventually. Sorry, like every single one of us all round robined, and we did that for years, like maybe 10 years. We did. Sorry, we even transitioned. Go ahead.
The updated system, yeah.
That's what I was just gonna say. We transitioned from the standard 3.5-ish D20 to the Saga edition, and we still use the same characters like that. But it all started because you proposed this unconventional version of Star Wars that kind of softened Michelle up to the idea. And once she softened up to the idea, we were able to later on pitch it again, and she kind of okayed it, and then it just took off. So thank you so much for that brilliant idea. And maybe someday we should run that. We should go back to that original idea. That might be fun. Mike,
what do you think of that?
That's interesting. It's definitely interesting.
Yeah, like a prehistoric Star Wars.
All right, but before the big city was there, and
right. Ooh, all right. Now you're talking. All right, so JB, what's your next one?
All right. I actually was going to talk about something. You said something before, is what are the kind of different, like, kind of, I know genre bend, not really genre bending, but the idea of games that are just so out there that to us they seem really out there. But if you go to conventions, sometimes you'll run across a role-playing game that is just so bizarre. I didn't play in the one I'm about to talk about, but I remember a friend of ours, Mike, other Mike in our group here, played in it and described it to us, and it was, you had to basically, nobody understood each other's language, and you had to, as you were role playing, create a language that all of you could understand.
Oh wow.
That's
It was,
different.
the whole thing was based on the idea that you have to, you, nobody speaks the same language, and you have to come up with a central language that everybody can understand. And it's, the role playing is basically coming up with it and being understood by each other. I don't remember what the game system was, but I just remember hearing about it thinking, now that's just bizarre. You know, but he said he had a great time playing it. It was really a lot of fun. But just really outside of the box type of role playing. And there's,
Yeah.
you know, things like that they get into now that are the kids are playing these days, that are just completely different than what we had. They really even question the idea of communication. Um, there is an element of that that's going to be in the, coming out very soon, hopefully in the next month or so. I think we've talked about it, the Planet of the Apes role playing game, and one of the types of characters you can play, and it's based on the '70s movies, but the humans in the '70s movies couldn't speak. So if you play one of the tribal humans, you can't speak. You have to get yourself understood as a character by something else. So, I mean, the idea of just even questioning how you communicate with each other is kind of an interesting thing, interesting idea. So that would have been one that I would have liked to have played. I wish I'd actually gotten into it. I didn't hear about it until afterward.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You know, it kind of reminds me of one of the inspirations for J.R.R. Tolkien to write in his mythos was to explore this elven language that he had created prior to writing any of these books. I think you know, he probably did a little bit of the dwarven language, did a little bit of the black tongue, and he wanted to sort of create a world where he could tell a story, where he could use this linguistic experiment of his. So yeah, so that reminded me of that, and I actually once played. Well, you both know Don, my friend Don, who we you all played it at his apartment in West Philly, the Ars Magica game. Don wanted to run a Star Wars game, and I was interested in playing an R2 unit because I wanted the challenge of playing a character that couldn't communicate, and I thought that would be fun. Like the only thing I would say was beep and boop, but you know, I would have to rely on narrating what my robot does to get points across, well, I think we only played like a session or two of that, so I didn't get enough time of that I would have liked. Maybe in your prehistoric Star Wars game, I'll play some kind of robot that can't speak. I don't know. So, how about you, Mike? What's your next one?
Well, it's so I was thinking about, you know, what JB had said originally about the different genre. It reminds me of riffs. If you've
Oh
ever
yeah,
played riffs. But one
yeah,
of the ones, and again early on, again now, not so unconventional, but at the time unconventional.
Yeah.
If you've ever played Shadowrun, and the reason
yes,
Shadowrun was interesting was because, you know, early in the day we played D&D, that got us our fantasy thing. We played Star Frontiers, which got us our sci-fi fix. Now Shadowrun
Right.
brought magic and technology
yeah,
together in the
yeah,
same, it was like a modern urban fantasy setting where they
yeah.
brought magic and technology together, which is kind of unconventional, because how do you blend those two things? You know, which trumps which?
Mhm.
Does magic trump tech? Does tech trump? And they came up with a good way to balance how these things interact, you know, and what cancels out what, and you know, and things of that. So I found it very, at the time, unconventional, but a lot of fun. Again, didn't DM it, didn't learn it well enough to DM it. I have books now that I could do that, but at the time it was very interesting to me because, again, what do you pick? You know, you love your fantasy, you love your sci-fi. Which side do I take? What do I do? How do I, you know,
Two great tastes that taste great
tastes great
together.
together. You know, you got your chocolate and my peanut butter. Yes. Um,
You got your fantasy and my sci-fi.
sci-fi. But it was, you know, at the time it was a very unconventional setting. that
Yeah.
it it gave, oh, I don't want to play fantasy. I don't want to play with dragons. I don't want to play, and I don't want to play spacious. And then you bring them together. Well, you can both have fun and
Play
do
'em
that.
all. Yeah.
We all can play. We all can win. Um, so that was my second thought of some early type of unconventional mixes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. All right, so the next one that I want to talk about is the Evil Hat company that puts out the Fate gaming system. They put out a couple of source books. One is called Fate Worlds Volume One: Worlds on Fire, and there is a
Now
Fate
that
World. Yeah, it's a good source book, and there is a Fate Worlds Volume Two, and each of these volumes, 1 and 2, has multiple settings in there. You could see on the first page there are 6 settings that this offers, and they're all somewhat unconventional. What they did was they compiled settings that were created by fans of the Fate system. And who were posting about it online, and they contacted these folks. Brennan Taylor, our friend Brennan Taylor, the creator of Bulldogs, is one of the contributors to Volume One. He contributed a setting called Tower of Serpents, and so that's this first setting in the book. There are other ones. There's a firefighting setting which is featured on the cover, which is kind of interesting. Burn Shift, Krieg Zeppelin, Valkyrie, Wild Blue. But I thought that the one that was the most interesting and the most unconventional that I wanted to try out of Volume One was a setting called White Picket Witches, and it is basically
yeah.
suburban housewives who practice magic. It's like Bewitched meets Housewives of fill in the city, like the reality show Housewives of whatever. And I thought that was like comical and interesting, and so I wanted to run it. And I started to talk about it with Jason, who we mentioned earlier, played the dragon in that multiverse game that Jonathan was talking about, and Michelle. I pitched it to Jason and Michelle, and they were like kind of on the fence, kind of on the white picket fence about it. They were like, I don't know, and so they started to suggest some minor tweaks to the setting to make it a little bit more palatable. And so what we ended up doing was we took White Picket Witches from the Fate Core book. We used the mechanics that are suggested for this game, White Picket Witches, which is a mod of the standard Fate Core mechanics. But rather than set it in the modern day, in the 21st century, we wanted to set it just after the fall of the Roman Empire, when Stregheria, which is witchcraft, folk witchcraft practiced almost exclusively by women, was really starting to fill in the gap in the Italian peninsula where the Roman Empire had left a hole. And so that's what we did, and I called it White Pillar Witches instead of White Picket Witches. And so we played White Picket Witches. The only thing is, by tweaking it the way we did, it actually became less unconventional and more kind of conventional of a setting. Had we left it alone and actually done the Suburban Housewives kind of version of it, that would have been even more unconventional and probably a better fit for this. But that's what we did, and it worked out really well. And if anybody is a fan of the Fate system and you're looking for some interesting settings, I strongly recommend Fate Worlds Volumes 1 and 2. Paul and I are currently playing a campaign, just him and me, on Wednesday nights, in the Timeworks setting, which is a time traveling setting, and that's one of the settings suggested in Fate Worlds Volume 2. And we're having a blast with that. So so that was it. White Picket Witches or White Pillar Witches. That was the next one. All right. So back to you, JB. Let's popcorn to you. What's your next one?
I'm going to go back to something and make a point about how you can sometimes take elements of something that you've heard or that you played in that is just thinking outside the box and
Yeah.
use it someplace else to good effect. I think we've talked about that maybe before, but um, one of the big different games that I played was Phil Chase, first time I played it was Ars Magica, and you mentioned it already.
Yep.
The idea of it being you're playing a troupe of characters so that everybody's responsible for not just one character, but two
Yeah.
and maybe more, because you've got the Grogs, who are
Mm-hmm.
all the small people in this covenant of sorcerers who help run it or protect
Mm-hmm.
it or cook,
Mm-hmm.
clean. I mean, it could be anybody who's actually
Anything.
part of this household. And it
Yeah.
was really a mind-blowing idea for me that you could stop and go, I don't want to play the wizard. We're gonna have uh, the two comical characters who are guarding the place and having the discussion of, what these guys are up to. Who are these people? They're really weird. Are we really? Do we want to be here? And but they would have like scenes that would and we would go like. I remember our friend. I think you've mentioned this before, Peter, who would go. We really can't play those characters as regular characters. They're just supposed to be background. And we would like run with it and play these characters
Yes, we would.
as for like the whole game, which was a lot of fun. But I was able to take that idea and I was going to run something at a local game shop, or I did run something at a local game shop for a little bit, based on Battlestar Galactica, and it was Margaret Weiss um, did the Cortex system. They used to tweak it for different things that they get permission to use that they pay for different licenses, and one
Mm-hmm.
of them was Battlestar Galactica, and I decided I wanted to run it so that everybody was responsible for a different two or three different kinds of characters, and one of them would be you have somebody in the fleet, but then you've got a pilot. You have to play like a warrior, or you play somebody who's not one of those. It's just something else, like a reporter or a doctor someplace or something. Something that was all three of those types of characters. And depending on what the scene requires, I'm going to pull those characters in. But you can't play both two at the same time. We're going to have to make a rule so that we don't have somebody playing two characters in the same scene. But I remember thinking that this would be really useful to play, that dual or triple role where you could just pull, and it makes the scene make more sense. If you don't have the same five characters who are always going to do the same thing all the time, you can pull other people in. If it doesn't make any sense that somebody would be there, you just leave them out and play the other character. And I just thought that was such a great idea, but it was a kind of unconventional way of role playing at the time again, that kind of affected another game that I thought it would, and it really, I think they enjoyed that. They enjoyed not having to worry about whether one character dies or what's going on with them. It just was an interesting idea.
Yeah, fantastic. I loved the idea of troop role playing, and that blew my mind as well when I joined Phil's group. Because it was Phil and Peter and Chris and George, and then I came in as sort of the fifth player after they had a fifth and sixth player that left, and so they were well into their campaign when I joined, and they were getting me up to speed on the setting and this and that, but it was the troop role playing part was what really intrigued me. I thought that was magnificent, and I don't know too many other games that adopted that. Like that didn't like catch on as much as I kind of expected. It is not for everybody. Troop role playing is not for everybody, and you have to be I don't know. I think maybe you have to have a little bit of skill when it comes to role playing to be able to jump from character to character like that. But maybe not. I mean, maybe anybody could do it.
I think the type of game too, it has to be a much bigger game too, because there's got to be room for all those characters. Actually, in Dune, I think is much more like that. Is a
Yeah.
very big Dune run. I'm running one right now. I've run a couple of games, and Modifius, the Modifius's Adventures in the Imperium, is a much bigger game, and you have to really be able to fill. You have to have a game that's going to be able to be filled up with extra characters like that. Because if
Hmm.
you're playing
Hmm.
something that's much more focused, it doesn't make any sense to really, go over to another character.
Right.
So I think it
And
matters what game you're playing or what campaign.
yeah, and I think what made it unique was that the pool of grogs, which were the foot soldiers and the servants and that kind of stuff, that was a common pool. Like anybody could pick one of those characters on any given day. So we all kind of played Gizzard, the shield master. We all said, I'm going to play Gizzard today. And we would take Gizzard, and then the next Sunday somebody else would play Gizzard if we even brought him along. So everybody had a wizard, everybody had a companion character, which could be any other non-wizard type of hero, and then there was the pool of grogs. So that was unique. We kind of did something similar in our big flagship 10-year Star Wars campaign, but not quite, because we all had like a handful of characters. So if Michelle didn't feel like playing her noble, her Princess Leia type character, she could play her Jedi apprentice type character. If she didn't feel like playing that, yeah,
She had
the
the clone
clones.
that she could play like 5 different versions of the same character.
That's right. Yeah, that
I
was
remember
yeah.
that
Which we
story.
loved.
I remember that
We
story.
had we had a blast with that. But everybody around that table had a handful of Star Wars characters that, I feel like playing this one today. I feel like playing that one. You had Tal Kelevlan, the Bothan Jedi. You had the Republic detective. You had a bunch of people that you could play,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it was similar to the Ars
It's
Magica
fun.
thing. Yeah, but there was no pool where everybody could. I'll take this character today, and you play it next time. There was that didn't happen. So yeah, that was the troop role playing was fantastic. All right, Mike, to you. What do you
Okay.
have to tell us?
So you, Robert, at least know. I'm not sure if JB has figured it out, but you know my love for horror, for
Oh yeah,
dystopian settings, for things of
oh
that
yes,
nature. So
indeed.
early on, we played White Wolf. I've also played Cthulhu, which I think you guys have played. But there's a newer game that piqued my interest. We haven't played yet. I have mentioned it to you guys a couple times. Called Candela Obscura. And this is put out by the same people that do Critical Role. But the interesting thing about this is, and it reminds me a lot of Cthulhu, because if you guys have played Cthulhu extensively, you know that you play basically until your character goes insane.
Yeah.
Okay.
Organized.
Or dies.
Horribly.
Candela Obscura has a very similar vibe to it. You're essentially like a group of paranormal investigators in kind of a steampunk type of world. But as you experience the horrors and do the damage, part of this is um, explaining what scars you get, explaining what abilities you lose and what abilities you gain based on these scars. As an example, um, you know, your leg gets crippled, so your movement is no longer, as part of one of these scars. So your movement is no longer good, and as a result, you become more perceptive. So you take one off of your mobility and add one to your perception, and things of this nature. But it's also it gets to the point where, if healing is at a premium. Healing does not come. You don't heal easily. There's a pool of ability, the ability to heal and to refresh pools at the beginning that you have to divvy up amongst the characters. It's not a foregone conclusion that at the end of the adventure you're going to rest and heal. It just doesn't happen. So the idea is you're playing through these campaigns to the point of, do you die, or does your character get so damaged or messed up that your character can no longer continue. So it's a very declining, as opposed to rising, where you're gaining levels, you're gaining power. This is a very much a declining type of campaign, which to me is quite a unique type of play and role play. I'd love to play it sometime. I don't have the materials yet. I will look at acquiring them. But it's just a very interesting, different type of setting in RPG, because you're trying to survive. You're trying to make the world a better place, but all the time you're losing parts of yourself, and you've got to role play losing parts of yourself, and so on and so on and so forth. But it's very dark, very dystopian, very up my alley. Um,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't realize that. I didn't know that you loved horror.
Oh yes, oh yes. I am a huge. My father had me reading Stephen King preteens. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
oh
that sounds really interesting. It's like there's a meta level of entropy that's like the whole game is about entropy. It's horror, it's death, it's kill you. But then there's like it's built in, it's baked into the mechanics that
yes,
entropy is what this whole game. That's really
yeah.
cool. I think that's neat.
So some of them
You
we'll
know.
have to try it sometime. Get it together and try.
Yeah, sure, definitely. All right. Well, the next one is I was talking about Don at whose apartment we all played Ars Magica some time back. Just before we started that Ars Magica campaign, we were playing with the other people that were in that Ars Magica campaign. We were playing other games at Don's on a Sunday, and so we were sort of in between games. We were like, all right, what do we want to do next? And this is just before the Ars Magica game. And we were pitching ideas like what we'd like to do next, and we narrowed it down to pulp and steampunk, and we couldn't decide which to do. So somebody said, let's do steam pulp. Let's presume that steam technology never went away, at least into the 1930s. And so instead of having, cars that run on gasoline and airplanes that run on gas, we on airplane fuel, everything's run on steam. And we're like, yeah, cool, let's do that. So that was interesting. We were using oh my goodness. I'm gonna have to put it into post production because it's like television stories, TV stories system. I can't think of the name of it, but I'll put it here in post production. And it's a gaming system that is designed to help you run a RPG like a television series, and it really like emphasizes television tropes and that kind of stuff, and how you can do it. And it's supposed to be episodic, and every character in the party gets an episode that focuses on them, and so forth. So it was fun. It was a fun romp, and so we played Steam Pulp, and I actually mentioned we had an earlier episode of Grognards where we were talking about pre-made campaigns as opposed to homebrews. And Mike, you had asked me, have you ever like used a homebrew more than once? And I said, oh yes, the pulp game that Jonathan and our friend Tom ran, and then when Tom left the group, I co-ran, and we round robined. That pulp game I've used the first session or two multiple times over. But in this particular game, I wasn't running it. We were taking turns running it, so everybody not only took a turn having their character featured as the star of that week's episode, but everybody also took turns running the game. So the character that I played was Sammy from the Pope game. He was the pilot of the Bellerophon airplane from the original Pope game, which was our Millennium Falcon. And he was an NPC sidekick of Jonathan's player character, or GMPC, if you will, since Jonathan, you were the GM of that game. So I loved the Sammy character, the NPC, and so I made him my PC in that Steam Pulp game. But I have to say, it didn't feel enough like steampunk to be steampunky, and it just kind of ended up really being pulp. So maybe we could have focused more on incorporating the technology as integral to the story, but it always seemed to be just kind of peripheral, and it ended up just being a pulp game. But at least in theory, we were trying steam pulp, and I had never, that wasn't even a subgenre I'd ever thought of before until we tried that. So there you have it. JB?
I think I'm gonna go back to something that you just made me think about. We had a game that I think was just before you showed up in our group, maybe a little before that. It was a friend of ours named Jim, who was in the group with Hardy and Tom and myself, and there was a Manny and
Edgar.
maybe there was a woman who no, it was before Edgar even.
Oh, before Edgar.
And
Oh yeah, the
Manny,
woman.
and then
Yeah. I
There's
remember
a
her. She
woman that
played.
was, I can't think of her name. She lived in
Yeah,
Staten Island.
yeah. I never met
Um,
her, but I heard about her. Yeah.
so Jim and I had come up with an idea for a superhero campaign, which was connected to World War II, in that we decided that World War II hadn't ended by 1948, and um, the the other side had, what was it? The other side had supervillains, but our side had the bomb. And that's what kept everything. And then we started coming up with superheroes. And our characters were the new superheroes who basically had to fight the supervillains to throw the balance off and finally win the war.
Yeah.
Um, which was interesting, but it didn't follow through for
Hmm.
various reasons, with change in the person who was in the group or who was playing. Jim actually left the group. We ended up, I think I've covered that before in one of the other episodes, but Jim wasn't running anymore. And we decided, why don't we just play a straight superhero game? And we did, and we ended up using champions and I think hero system. And that's when I think where the Port Bastion game, no, wait. I think that's where it was something before the Port Bastion game where no, that was Port Bastion. And it segued into that. But originally, we had been playing this very strange kind of alternate history game that had ended up um, just basically devolving. But then we kind of put it back together again into just a more standard game. But the idea that sometimes an idea that misses leads to something else. Maybe even if you're thinking outside of the box, even if it doesn't work, you can still kind of use the idea to go forward with something else. A similar thing happened with the uh, pulp game,
Yeah.
which it came from something else. That was an idea that I had that didn't work
Hmm.
for various reasons, but we retooled it and made it
Yeah.
work as something else.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
sometimes even a bad idea can be an idea that leads to something down the road, something
Right.
unconventional
For
that
sure.
leads into something else.
Yeah, and for the sake of the viewers, the reason the Port Bastion was so significant to Jonathan, that was a setting, a superhero setting, that served as the base of operations, the city of operations for a huge flagship superhero campaign that our gaming group played for years and years and years. We often would like shelve it, and then we would come back to it, and then we would shelve it again, then we would come back to it, and it was
We go into different eras. I think
we'd
we
go into
went into the
different
present
eras.
day. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. We did. Yeah, we did. We did like World War II era, then we did the present day era. Yeah, and I had a character who had an incarnation in each. Sometimes it was a different person and so forth. And one of them was an incarnation of your character, the Radio Ranger, and then later on I
Right,
made him
right,
like
right.
the Video Avenger in the 1980s, and then online in the 1990s and early aughts. Yeah. So that's why that was significant. It was a huge flagship campaign, and it's interesting that that's the campaign that you were about to talk about, was that four-color superhero game, because that's the context in which I heard about this female player that played with you guys that I never met. Because I remember Peter saying, "We played this four-color superhero game before you got here, Robin, and we all did our best to create a four-color superhero character, and I don't really feel any of us like really hit the mark very well in coming up with a four-color super golden age character, except this one player." And he said, and her character's name was the greatest four-color golden age superhero character name I'd ever heard. And I was like, "What was it, Pete?" And he goes, "Freedom Ring." And I was like, Freedom Ring? And he's like, yeah, she had this ring, and it was kind of like, the Green Lantern ring, but she was like a flag suit character. And I was like, wow, that is pretty cool. So Peter was very impressed with Freedom Ring, and I thought, or maybe it was Frida Ring, or maybe Frida was her.
It was Freedom.
It was Freedom Ring, yeah. And he was very impressed with that. And I have to admit, that was pretty cool. Freedom Ring. That is a good 4 colors of your character. All right. Well, so go ahead, Mike. What do you have to tell us?
So this is the last one I actually have on my list, which
Okay,
is,
good.
and you guys, you may remember this, Rob, because I think I introduced this to us at some point too. A game called Paranoia.
Oh,
You remember
yeah.
Paranoia?
Do I?
So the whole, again, love dystopian stuff. You know,
Mhm.
the whole idea behind the game is you are trying to do these impossible tasks while again you're slowly going crazy. And I remember everybody had like everybody had a dementia of some sort, and some of my favorite story, ice cream makes the computer works better, just shovel it in, things of that nature. But it was when I first grabbed it, and I do not know where my set went, but when I first grabbed it, the tagline was, you must serve the computer. If you don't serve the computer, you may be used as reactor shielding. So it's again, two of my favorite things: dystopia and slightly comedy. Again, not your typical setting or goals or things of that nature. Where again, the whole goal is to do impossible tasks in impossible ways. Jury, to bring back an '80s term, which kind of you had to MacGyver everything.
Yeah. That's
So
right.
it was,
That's right.
so it was.
Brazil a lot. The
What's
movie
that?
Brazil. It reminded me of the
Yes,
movie Brazil a
yes,
lot.
yes,
Mhm.
very much so. But it was
Yep,
it was a
Terry
very
Gilliam's.
unconventional setting and role playing game type theme. So
Yeah.
that's the last one I have on my list.
So you may be interested to know that Paul was fishing around on the internet. He was going down a few RPG rabbit holes, and he stumbles across Paranoia. And he texts me and he goes, hey, I just found this really cool game. Have you ever heard of it? It's called Paranoia. And I was like, oh, yeah, I know Paranoia. Oh, yeah. And he's like, yeah, I'm really excited to run it. So I ordered it. And I'm like, good for you. So, he's starting to get the GM bug a little bit more than he ever had. And he's interested in running Paranoia. So
that would be fun.
Yeah, so maybe we'll do that with him.
Okay. That's a good idea. I like that.
All right, well, since that was your last one,
That game
go
is the first time I'd ever heard the saying, I remember back in college, just because you think you're paranoid doesn't mean they're really not out to get you.
Out to get you,
right.
yes.
Yep. That was the first, yeah. So, okay, so I'm gonna give my last one too. It could be two, but it's easy enough to combine them into one. So, during the 2020 shutdown, when everybody was social distancing, we weren't going out, and Zoom exploded, and all these video conferencing, the video conferencing industry conveniently boomed. I reached out to Phil Chase, the original co-host of Grognards of Gaming, and I said to Phil, hey, since like, you're in Michigan and I'm in Pennsylvania, and Peter and Chris from our old New York game, they're in Washington State now. Now that we've got this like Zoom, we could conceivably get the band back together and like play a role-playing game together. And Phil was like, oh, that's a huge idea. Yeah, let's do that. That sounds great. That's huge. So we made it happen, and we like emailed Pete and Chris, and we were like, you guys, we're presuming you guys have Zoom, because like everybody has to Zoom now to get around. So do you guys, what do you think about getting the band back together, and we'll play a role-playing game? And they were like, yes, let's do that. So we were like dedicating Sunday nights for me, and Sunday afternoons for those in Washington State, to running a game. And so I said, all right, let's use the Fate system. If we use the Fate system, I'm happy to run it. And they were like, all right, that sounds cool. Yeah, we can learn the Fate system. They weren't all that familiar with it, but they were willing to learn it. And I said, let's do this. Why don't each of you, all three of you, submit to me 3 ideas for a setting that you would like to play in, like the top 3. And I'll look at the 9 settings that you guys propose, and I'll pick one that is the most interesting to me, and then I'll throw it back to you guys. And if I get your buy-in, that'll be the setting. They were like, that sounds like a great idea. So everybody sent me 3 ideas for a setting, and the one that I found to be the most interesting was one of the 3 settings that Chris submitted. He submitted, I forget the other 2, but he submitted one where we all play in an urban, well, it didn't necessarily have to be urban arcana, but it was like there was a fantasy races element to the setting, but we all played bards. We were all musicians. And I was like, that sounds interesting. I would like to, let's think about that. And so I put my own twist on it. I said, how about this? When I threw it back to the guys, I said, I really liked Chris's suggestion that we all play like in a fantasy setting where we all play bards. How about if we set it, if it's like a modern day urban arcana game, so you could play an orc, you could play an elf, you could play a human, whatever you want, but it's urban arcana, and we're all members of a rock band. And they were like, yeah, that sounds cool. Let's do that. So we played a game called, I called it Rock Gods. And so the idea of the game, I completely lifted it off of a film, a comedy that came out in like the 1990s, maybe the early aughts. It was called Still Crazy. And it featured a lot of the actors that were in like the Full Monty and all those other British films. It was called Still Crazy. As a matter of fact, in Love Actually, there is a character in one of the Love Actually vignettes who is like a rock star. And he's basically playing the same character that he did in Still Crazy. I don't know if it's the exact same character, but he's got the same name.
Bill Nye. I think it's Bill Nye playing the aging. Yeah,
the aging rocker. But he played a very similar character, almost identical character, in Still Crazy. And Still Crazy was a movie about a band called Strange Fruit, who were like hugely popular in the late 60s, early 70s. And then, like, because of all this band drama and the changing of music into more like a punk and new wave movement, and the old rock was dying, the band kind of collapsed and everybody went their separate ways, and there were all these hurt feelings and blah, 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 blah. But then the 1990s come around, and the band's keyboardist starts noticing that all these old bands from like the 70s are enjoying a new wave of popularity because of the nostalgia factor. And he gets this brilliant idea, hey, why don't I get the band back together and we tour and we ride this nostalgia wave? And I was like, since the old New York gaming group is getting the band back together, why don't we do a game about getting the band back together? So I just completely lifted the storyline, and nobody knew it. Nobody in the party knew it. I just completely took the movie, Still Crazy, and just ran it as a role-playing game. And we had a blast. Of course, the twist was Chris played like the orc drummer, and Peter played like the bassist, songwriter genius of the band, like the true creative genius of the band. And he was like a she elf, she like Sidhe, like a high elf. And Phil played like a dwarf who used to be a roadie for the band, like back in the 70s, and in their waning days in the 80s. But now they're because their actual guitarist left or something, he stepped up because he was a fairly good guitarist. He stepped up from roadie and filled the slot of the guitars. And we had all these interesting characters. And one of the NPCs was like, it was their former like gopher girl, like the girl that they sent to get coffee and deal with the minutia of the band. But now, like 20 years later, she's mature. She's the mother of a child, and they convince her to go. And now she's acting as their tour manager. So she was like the lowest on the totem pole back then, and now she's like their manager now. And she was like an NPC, and it just was so much fun. We had a blast. And there was a Fate Core supplement, a fan-made Fate Core supplement that was floating around on the internet, and it was how you can run like in Fate Core a Scooby-Doo or Josie and the Pussycats kind of story, right? Where you play like a band and there's a chase scene in the middle where everybody's running through different doors and your music is playing and that kind of stuff. And I was like, I kind of lifted some of that and used it, some of mechanics wise and so forth, because it had like something called the Battle of the Bands. It had like a whole mechanic for Battle of the Bands, and I was like, oh, I'm going to use that. And there was a session or two where we did a Battle of the Bands and stuff. It was a blast, and so they got the band back together, and so that was like our first session where they convinced everybody to go to rejoin, and then they went on tour. They did a European tour, and we just had a blast. So that was kind of unconventional. And I just very quickly, I want to segue from that to so Paul knew this because Paul was he never really GM'd. He was always sort of trepidatious about GMing because he had never really put his whole foot in the pool. He had only ever dipped a toe in, like back in the 80s. I think he ran a Star Frontiers game for us or something like that, and that was about it. He was mostly only ever a player. But now, he's kind of he started to get interested in trying to run some stuff. So I said, well, Paul, let me just give you some materials. And I handed him the Rock Gods folder that I had and all the materials I had created. And I said, here's a model of a game that I created like from scratch. So you can look through it and see how I did it. You kind of see how the sausage is made. And so he knew that I had run this Rock Gods campaign for Phil and the other guys, but I don't think he had much more of an interest in it than just to kind of see how I had created the materials. He gave it back to me, and he never really talked about it again. Well, one day, I forget if it was I think it might have been a text thread conversation among the group of us, us Grognards, and Paul, or maybe Jonathan, you were somehow involved. But you said something, or Paul said something, and then either you or Paul said, "Oh well, you should run a game set in the yacht rock music genre." And
No, I think it was Paul. It was Paul.
It was Paul. Paul said jokingly, "We should run a game set in the yacht rock music genre," and it was kind of a half-formed idea in his head because he knew that I had done something like this with the Rock Gods game for the other guys. And so he was kind of like alluding to that, but saying like it should be done as yacht rock rather than rock and roll, like 70s rock and roll. And I was like, I knew he was joking, but I immediately was like, done. Because as soon as he said it, I was like, yes, I could totally do that. So I was like, done. And he was like, wait, what? And I'm like, yes, let's do it. And he's like, really? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, okay. And so it was just him and me. And I ran. And so the premise of this game was, it wasn't quite like the Rock Gods game. It was somewhat different. It was like this. What if Miami Vice wasn't the first TV series to make like rock stars into actors and feature them in the show? What if in the 1970s there was a show that preceded Miami Vice, did the exact same thing? It was like a detective show, but like all the heroes, all the villains, all the guest characters were like rock stars from the yacht rock, from the 70s soft rock genre. And so that's what we did. And so Paul created like this detective like character. And so like Michael McDonald plays Charlemagne, this con artist named Charlemagne, and he's like the GM NPC, and he's always helping Paul's detective character. And like the villains are always like Steely Dan, or like the bad guys, or maybe they're the good guys are like the Doobie Brothers. They're helping, but they're not the Doobie Brothers, but they are the Doobie Brothers. But they're playing they're together as a group, but they're whatever, they run a farm, they run a marijuana farm, or whatever they do. It's just like madcap crazy stories. And basically it's just to make each other laugh. Like we use for aspects and advantages, we try to use the titles of songs or the titles of albums or lyrics from yacht rock songs as our advantages and all that kind of stuff. And our number one goal is how much fun can we have with like just making yacht rock references and making each other laugh. And like the story is kind of secondary, but I mean, we always have a full encapsulated story. It always ties up at the end, but it's more like the game that you were talking about, Tune, where the goal is to like just
make
have
everybody
laughs.
laugh and have all the references.
So,
Okay.
So that's my last one. All right, Jonathan, did you have a last one, or are we done?
I just wanted to say something at the end here.
Yeah.
When you know what? I do have the last one. I'm sorry.
Okay.
This is
Rock and roll.
more outside the box, but this is from a while ago. It was the idea. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of a role playing game called De Profundis.
Yes,
No.
I have it.
You
It's
have
it's
it?
basically role playing as an epistolary, but it's all letters, and you actually are encouraged to use the mail and actually send letters back and forth to each other as characters and correspondence, and you build on the story as you write to each other. And what I think what Mike you might be interested in is that it's usually like very Call of Cthulhu type of storylines that
It
they're
is
talking
it
about of
it is
people
it is
writing
giving
back to
me
each other about strange occurrences and things that are going on with them, and then giving somebody else advice on something that they heard that they said, so that you actually do, or you could um uh but the idea is that it's all epistolary. It's all written down, and it's all about letters. And I don't know if they do journal entries is also epistolary, but the idea is that you're writing back and forth. And I just love the idea of the fact that no one modern days would want to do this because it has to do with snail mail.
that
But
now I'll
the
tell you
whole thing
something.
is,
I'll
yeah,
tell you something. It's very
yeah.
interesting you say that because I'll tell you one of my favorite classic pieces of literature, and what this is giving me the vibe of, is C.S. Lewis's Screw Tape Letters.
Oh yeah, love that.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah. I didn't think you were going to
yeah,
say that, but that's cool.
yeah. There it is.
There.
Yeah.
I have it on
Those are
I have
pretty
it on
great
audio,
letters.
or I have it on cassette tape somewhere.
Great book. Great
But
book.
it is one of my all-time favorite classics.
Yeah, it is a classic. So
Right.
I've played De Profundis, and I played it with Michelle. And
I knew you were gonna say that.
yeah, you knew I was going to say that because she
Yeah.
loves letter writing, and I love letter writing. And I said to her one day, I was like, "There's this." Maybe she showed me the game, or I showed it to her. She's like, "There's this, this game called De Profundis where you write letters to each other." And I was like, "Let's do it." And she's like, "Okay." And we didn't like discuss it ahead of time. We just said we're going to play it. I have it. The rule book is thin. I mean, it's a thin rule book. And I don't even know if she got the rule book, or maybe I photocopied some pages and
I
sent it
got
to her
it
so
from
she could get the
too,
gist of it.
yeah.
But I started it off. I kicked it off, and because White Wolf's Wraith setting is my favorite White Wolf setting, and one of my favorite settings of all. Instead of writing a De Profundis letter that kind of tended towards the Cthulhu, I wrote a De Profundis letter that was like it could have just been a White Wolf Wraith game, and so my character was like writing to her from post mortem, and he's stuck in between the
Beyond the
worlds.
grave.
Beyond the grave, he's writing to her, and he's like, "It's a great effort for me to even move the pen. It's taken me like 15 hours just to write this first sentence because it's concentrating on moving the pen. It's a great effort, yada yada yada." And I wrote the letter so that it would be like when she received it and she read it, her character would think, has he gone mad? Like, is he mad? And so it was never clear to her from the first letter whether my character was just insane or whether he was really dead. And so we were going to develop that. And she wrote back to me a time, and I wrote back a time, and she wrote back a time. But it tapered off. Unfortunately, we never really pursued it for very long. I think we only wrote about 4 letters. And it kind of suffered from what I think everybody might know from play by email. Play by email campaigns tend to taper out because they're so slow, they're so ponderous that after several months or a year, maybe if you manage to do it a year or two, even eventually it just dies because you never really get to where you need to go in time. The pacing is just troublesome, and this kind of suffers from that.
It's hard
What's
to
that?
keep the energy of a game up that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but De Profundis, yeah, I had great fun while we were playing it, and yeah, that's a good one. All right, well, there you go. A couple of times throughout this episode, we talked about flagship games. So, your Port Bastion game. We talked about the Star Wars flagship game, the superhero flagship game, and so forth. So I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring our good friend Ed in as a guest, not necessarily as a new Grognard on the panel, but at least as a guest, maybe even a recurring guest when we can. And I would like to arrange for Ed to come talk to us, and maybe we could do the topic of flagship games, since Ed ran the flagship Dungeons and Dragons game for us when we were young guys. So what do you think about that? Bringing Ed in to talk about flagship games.
Sounds good.
Sure.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, very good. Then that's what we're going to do next time on Grognards of Gaming. We're going to have our good friend Ed. He's going to guest appear, and we're going to talk about flagship games, the flagship campaign. So that's it. I hope everybody enjoyed this episode. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time on the Grognards of Gaming. Happy gaming, as Paul would say.